Hello everyone and welcome back to another Wizard101 video. Today, I was requested by someone in my Discord server. You can see here this comment. Tier list of schools based on the amount of brain power they require. So the amount of skill, creativity of playstyle, the amount of repetition of spells, etc, etc. I thought that this was a fantastic idea because I think it's funny. I mentioned in the video where I said I can't really rank the schools. This is something I can rank them objectively by. This is something I can go, okay, this is how much brain power it takes. So I like this idea, and we're gonna get into it today. So let's begin. Number 7, Storm. Now, I find it ironic that the school, when you create it, that says it requires creativity and it's a school of creativity, that it is the least creative. I feel like Storm can be summed up with a haha funny Tempest go burr, you know, that kind of deal. Really, they just spam Tempest. It requires almost no brain power to do, and you can tell that Storm requires almost no brain power to do because every Storm Wizard I've ever met lacks significantly in brain power. They're a few crayons short of the box, if you will, and it's not because they lost the crayons, it's because they ate the crayons. So, Storm, dead last. I've never seen a creative Storm Wizard do something interesting. Storm Wizards are just kind of brain dead. At some point, I'm going to insult Storm to the point where all my Storm subscribers are going to unsubscribe, and that's fine. You know, I'll miss you. Probably, not really. But Storm Wizards are always the bane of my existence when I'm going through dungeons or whatever, because they do require such low skill that they end up being played frequently by the people who don't know how to play the game and never learn how to play the game. They tend to be some of the worst at the game, which kind of sucks, but whatever. Now we're going to get into the next one, which is Death. I'm going to say Death next. It was a bit of a toss-up between the next one and Death, but I'm going to say Death because it doesn't really require too much creativity at all, to be honest. The spells are really easy to understand, really easy to use, and you can honestly, it requires some of the least amount of brain power to actually work through the game. Honestly, even Storm may require slightly more to kind of not die, but I'm just using this based off general observations, and Storm Wizards are definitely dumber than Death Wizards on average. So I put that there. But I think Death fits into this number 6 because I don't think it actually requires too much effort. I don't know if you guys have ever played Death, but it is such an entry-level school that just about like a 5-year-old could figure out how to do it significantly easier than any other school. The healback spells are incredibly useful and make the skill ceiling significantly lower, and the fact that they don't have a 4-pip AoE is honestly kind of fine, because once they get up to level 48, which isn't too difficult even without the 4-pip AoE, they get Scarecrow, which is probably the best of the 7-pip AoE spells. Definitely, I'd say Death is number 6. Number 5, and this one might be a bit of a controversial one, is actually Fire. Because Fire is more strategic, at least in the early game. They have some heal over times, such as Link, that they can use, which are pretty cool. They have damage over times, which require a bit more thinking, and then they have detonate, so they can detonate those. Overall, definitely a lot more versatility than Storm, but Fire can also be summed up to like, haha, funny Fire Dragon go burr, or funny Meteor Strike go burr. Realistically, most Fire players are just the people in Storm who realize that Fire is slightly better in the current meta, so they switch to Fire, or they found Fire to be cool. So one of the two. I would say that Fire is the next most difficult to play, at least in regards to brain power. The only reason why Death is below it is because I think Death is just so absurdly easy that you never really get too into it. Next on our list, and these were really a struggle to think about, but I had to think about how much brain power it took me to do. And next, I am going to put Life, because I think Life, despite the fact that it is a really, really good school, is actually quite easy. Life is a really, really good school. I'm going to say that now. Pyrosquid, if you're watching this, I know you love Life. Life is a fantastic school, but a thing to note, and a thing that's important to point out, is that they actually get very high damage for a defensive school. And it's almost ridiculous. By level 100, they have probably 120 plus damage, and their Waterworks gear actually gives the second highest damage out of any Waterworks gear. Like, it's higher than Fire. The only waterworks gear that actually gives higher damage than Life's is Storm, which I find to be incredibly funny. So I would say that they are probably one of the best schools to go through Arc 2 with, which in my opinion is the most difficult arc. But on the other hand, and this is important to note, I think that they require more brain power than both Fire and Death, because I think that it actually requires a bit of strategy, knowing when to heal, knowing when to hit, rather than actually just hitting and blading up and hitting, which I find to be what Death and Fire do, and obviously what Storm does. Next was another bit of a toss-up between the next two, but I ultimately decided that I'm going to put Myth here rather than the what's next. Myth, for me, was a really fun school. It used to be even more difficult than it is now, but it is still actually quite difficult because they aren't really the best at anything. They aren't particularly bad per se, but they don't really have the highest damage. A lot of bosses in this game are Myth, which is a funny thing you notice as you go through. There are a lot of Myth bosses. And up until recently, they didn't actually have Orthrus, which hit all. Now that they have hit all, it's definitely a little bit easier. But I would say Myth is actually still difficult to play because it requires a bit of finesse. You know, knowing when to use minions, knowing when not to use minions. Basically, when you're going on the offense or when you're going on the defense. And I think Myth is difficult like that because it's not the strongest, it's not the weakest, but it doesn't have anything that it's really going for it, which is why I'm putting it here. Next, I'm going to put Ice. And Ice, for me, was one of the hardest schools in this game to do. I think the reason why it requires just so much brain power is, one, they have so little damage. Like, it's almost ridiculous how little damage they have. When I was level 60, I had maybe 40 to 60 damage, somewhere in there, which is super low. Usually I have 90 damage at level 60. So the fact that I had so low was really difficult to acclimate to. But on top of that, they don't get a blade until level 38, which is actually ridiculous. I think it's one of the reasons why Ice is the hardest. They don't really get any major way to actually kill enemies quite frequently up until probably Dragonspire. And that makes Arc 1 especially hard for Ice. I would say that definitely they are extremely difficult. And in Arc 2, if you're soloing, the only thing you have going for you is your high health and maybe your shields. But every round you spend shielding is a round that you're not killing the enemy, which is a bit painful, especially for my playstyle. So I would say that Ice requires some of the highest brain power to actually use correctly. Now we're coming in at number 1, and this one should be pretty obvious, and I think should be obvious when you click on this video, and that is Balance. For me, Balance is without a doubt the hardest school to learn, master, and even use. The problem that Balance has, and it has a few, is one, they're balanced. They're not particularly good at any one thing. They're just kind of a jack of all trades. They don't have the highest amount of damage. They don't have the highest health. They don't have the highest resist. And ultimately, that shows when you're going through the game. I'd say that Myth is the only one that's really a similar experience in that regard. But contrary to Myth, Balance has the issue where if you go against a Balance boss, you're kind of screwed because your best hit, especially in the earlier game, is going to be Judgment, and that doesn't work against Balance bosses because Balance Convert doesn't really exist. Technically, it does exist on an Athame at like level 130 or something, but it does. Basically, that means it doesn't exist. I would say that Balance has the most difficulty soloing out of any school, mostly just because I think it has a significant issue of balancing and not doing a lot of damage. Balance was the most difficult school, hands down, that I've ever done, and obviously I did it in my Balance Let's Play series. I think that ultimately it is the hardest, but it is super rewarding to do, and it might take a lot of brain power, but you need to kind of strategize and actually work out how to beat enemies, which is something that I don't think you need to do with too many other schools, which is really nice. I love Balance for the reason where it's not just a haha, hit enemy, they die, right? Which is the case with Storm, Fire, maybe even something like Life or Myth. But Balance is really strategic. You have to use the proper spells, otherwise you are at risk of dying almost instantly. So ultimately, that is me ranking the schools by how hard they are. Just a quick recap. It went Storm, Death, Fire, life, myth, ice, balance. So I think that those are pretty decent rankings of how difficult each school is, especially like brain power wise. I think storm without a doubt requires the least brain power, and balance without a doubt requires the most. I imagine people might not like some of my middle rankings, but I think I'm pretty firm on those. I think that those are about how difficult each school is in my head. Let me know what you think. Do you agree? Do you disagree? What would you change? So thank you all for watching. I'll see you in the next video. Adios.